All right, thank you for the break. Hope you're following well. You can pause me if it goes a bit too fast and so on. We are still laboring under point 5. Now we come to parenthetical lowercase b, is conquest, from 40, verses 40 to 45 to finish our chapter 11. You come with me, we read, we do the exposition, we'll see where God is taking us concerning his conquest and so on. Verses 40 to 45, come, we circle a few things together. At the end time, circle the end time, the king of the south will collide with him and the king of the north. Circle king of the south and king of the north. Will storm against him with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships, and he will enter countries, overflow them, circle the word overflow, and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land, circle the beautiful land, and many countries will fall. But these will be rescued out of his hand. Circle Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon. Circle them all. Then he will stretch his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt, circle Egypt, will not escape. But he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, over all the precious things of Egypt. Libyans and Ethiopians will follow at his heels. Circle Egypt, Libyans, and Ethiopians. But rumors from the east, circle the east, and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch the tents, circle the tents of his royal pavilion, between the seas, circle the word seas, and the beautiful holy mountain, and he will come to his hand, circle coming to his hand, and no one will help him. That's the end of verse 45. Lots of work to do here. Okay? This passage here deals with the war that will be happening at the midpoint of the Great Tribulation right here. This is not the campaign, what the theologian called the campaign of Armageddon, but this is the second war that will be happening during the Great Tribulation. And based upon Daniel chapters 2 and 7, remember that in the first half of the Great Tribulation, right here, in the first half of it, the world will be divided in what? In 10 Gentiles nation. That's the 10 toes of Daniel chapter 2 and so on. We have learned that in Daniel chapters 2 and 7. In the first part of the Great Tribulation, the first 3.5 years, the system of government that will take place at this very time will be the 10 Gentiles nation, co-equally ruled by 10 men or 10 kings. Okay? But as Daniel chapter 7 pointed out, at the midpoint of the Great Tribulation, the Antichrist will kill 3 kings here. He will kill 3 kings, and the 7 others will bow the knee to him. That is why he will kill 3 kings, 7 will be left, but by his power they will bow the knee to him, so the Antichrist will become the sole ruler of the second half of the Great Tribulation. And these verses basically describes the Antichrist's war against the 10 kings, okay, with some specific activities that I just read to you in verses 40 to 45. In verse 40, at the end time, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships, and he will enter countries, overflow with them, and pass through here. Okay? In verse 40, the war breaks out, and the passage basically describes the second half of the Great Tribulation, when the Antichrist will take full control religiously and politically. Political full control and religious full control. The 3 kings here that he will kill, they will be named in a moment of time. Among the ones that he will wage war against are the king of the south, Egypt. He will eventually contend with the Antichrist. Egypt will eventually contend with the Antichrist, and the king of the north. And we know that the king of the north here is Syria. We know that from Daniel 11. He will wage war against the Antichrist suddenly, and so on. And it's not the Ezekiel invasion of the North, Russia. In that case here, in the context of Daniel, we have learned that extensively and the hard way because it was tedious. The king of the north is Syria, and the king of the south is Egypt. He will use in verse 40 both the navy and the army. And the Antichrist will defeat his opposition. He will enter countries like Syria and Egypt, and he will overflow. The overflow, again, it's an image of a flood. And whenever the word flood is used symbolically, it's always an invading army and so on. So that's why I ask you to circle the word overflow, because it's a symbol. These are symbols of military invasion. Be careful, once again, not to use the north in that context here as being Russia. It's not Russia. The context of Daniel, the north is Syria. So the two kings here, Egypt, south, and Syria, north, will be defeated here. Also, point number 3 here in verse 41. In verse 41 here, he will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall, but these will be rescued out of his hand, Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon here. Okay, Israel will fall at that time. Israel will fall at the middle point of the Great Tribulation. That's the beautiful land. What came to existence in 1948, the state of Israel, will collapse at the midpoint of the Great Tribulation here. Since 1948, it existed as a nation, and then it will collapse. Okay? And the Gentiles will take over. That's the last ruler. That's the fall of Jerusalem to come. It's described in the book of Revelation, chapters 11, verses 1 and 2. And that will include a complete takeover of the temple compound. And you know exactly what will be happening at the midpoint of the Great Tribulation. Who will sit in the temple there at the midpoint of the Great Tribulation and proclaim himself to be God? The Antichrist. Because that's the times of the Gentiles. So they need to retake control of the temple compound out there. So the state of 1948 of this world is destined to collapse. A Jewish Orthodox, they don't know about that. In Revelation 11, remember that's Daniel's team, and it was a Gentile. The Antichrist will be a Gentile, and the city and the temple will fall over the hands of the Gentiles and so on. He is the last ruler. In verse 41 here, it is the same invasion of Israel when the Antichrist takes the country to set up his stage of the abomination of desolation. That's why Antiochus IV was a type of the Antichrist. Because this is the killing of the 3 kings and the submission of the 7 others that will give him the key of full power of the world. Full power of the world. Of the world. Forget about Canada, United States. These are not powers. They are right now, but there will be basically just 10 kings. The continent will be ruled by 10 kings. We don't know who they are right now, but they will not have power anymore. All of this power will be given to the Antichrist, and he is the one that will rule the planet for 42 months. I think it's necessary that we will get soon into the book of Revelation here. Jesus spoke about it in Matthew 24, verse 15. What's the signal? To flee out of the land here. And the Jews will have to flee in a city called Basra, in Hebrew, or Petra in Greek. They will have to flee to that place here. Okay? He will declare himself to be God, And basically, they will have to get out of the land. Eventually, he gains the world political control in Daniel 41, and many countries will fall. And notice in verse 41, who will not fall? But these will be rescued out of his hand. Edom, Moab, and the foremost part of the sons of Ammon here. It's three ancient states that are now only one as we speak, the kingdom of Jordan, the kingdom of the Hashemite. If you go to the maximum south in Israel, you end up to Eilat. If you look across the Gulf of the Aqaba, it's Jordan right now, the kingdom of the Hashemite. It includes the three as well as Gilead, and this is the divine protection. It's the place. Bozrah and Petra are located in these three places right now. And this is God's provision to have a place of escape for the Jews when he commit the great abomination of desolation here. It's a place for the Jewish people to flee in safety. For the last 3.5 years, they will be miraculously provided for at that place. And by the way, this is the place of the second coming. And it does explain for you a Jewish principle here. When one part of the world close their door on the Jewish people, there is another part that will open their doors to them, basically. That's the place of refuge. That's the principle of the city of refuge here. In 1492, Spain here closed their door on the Jewish people. What happened in 1492? On the same year, Columbus discovered the New World. And the New World became a haven for the Jews to flee. So when one country shut their doors by means of anti-Semitic attitude, there is another country that receives them. And right now, Canada and United States, as I speak right now, are becoming more and more under Trudeau and Biden anti-Semitic. So something will have to happen down the road here. Same provision. At the end of time, in the future, the only place will end up being east of Israel, the kingdom of the Hashemite, the kingdom of Jordan. That's the place of the second coming. That's the place where the remnant will flee here. And that's basically the same topic as the city of refuge and so on. Okay? Now that the east is freed, basically, that will make the flight from Israel possible to flee to that place to be looked after. That's what Jesus is describing in Matthew 24, verses 15 to 22. Because the takeover of Israel by the Antichrist will cause Israel to have to flee. So that's why Christ says, when you see the abomination of desolation, get out of there. So they will get out of Jerusalem to go where? Right here on the board, Bozrah and Petra, which is a place protected based on Daniel chapter 11, verse 41. And when the Antichrist will commit the abomination of desolation here, the freedom of the Transjordan territory provides a place for escape. And that's the mountains. It's very mountainous here. That's the mountains talked about in Matthew 24, 15 and 16. And that's the wilderness. It's very mountainous there. And it's very wilderness there based upon Revelation chapter 12 of verses 6, 13 and 14 here. Micah chapter 2 verse 12. I'm going to read that for you. In the book of Micah chapter 2 verse 12. Let me find Micah chapter 2. I have it. Chapter 2 verse 12. That's what we call Bozrah. I will surely assemble all of you, Jacob. That's the remnant. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel, and I will put them together like sheep in the fold. Sheep in the fold. If you would read Hebrew, sheep in the fold is Bozrah. That's the expression. That's what it means. So he will assemble the people, his people, the Jews, in Bozrah and Petra. Petra is the rock, basically. It's the Greek here. So, once again, the principle of city of refuge for Israel will carry out until the end of the Great Tribulation. In verses 42 and 43 here, where it says, "Then he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape, but he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold, silver, and all the precious things of Egypt, and Libyans and Ethiopians will follow at his heel," here. Okay? He's now dealing with the fall of Egypt at that place, because the king of the south is one of the three kings killed. We have already seen that. And the land of Egypt will not escape. He is basically the land of Egypt. The king of Egypt at that time will be the first to be killed. It's the same thing as chapter 7 of Daniel, verses 8, 20, and 24. Then he will turn Egypt, he will spoil Egypt. And then once he's done in Egypt, he's going to move to Africa. Africa will be before him, seen in the two words of Libya, or it says Libyans, that says Libya and Ethiopia. And then in verse 44, he describes the fall of Syria. Verse 44, "But rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many." The east is always Mesopotamia, nothing to do with China or Japan, so which is now Iraq and Iran, and that's the second of the three kings that he will fall, the kings of the north in verse 44, the king of Syria, not Russia. So the king of the north is the third king to be killed, and so on. Then in verse 45, "He will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him," basically. So that's the headquarters of the Antichrist, will be at Jerusalem. I'm asking you to circle the word tents, because tents here, it's a military tent, kind of a headquarter, like the Desert Storm and so on. They pitch a tent and it becomes the headquarter, the central of communication and so on. So a royal tent will be erected there, and this is the royal tent of the Antichrist. Where it says between the seas, it's between the Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea. Okay? What do you have between the Dead Sea on the east and the Mediterranean Sea on the west? You find the place Jerusalem. That's why I ask you to circle between the seas and the beautiful land, holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. The holy mountain is the Temple Mount, because he will take the temple compound, committing the abomination of desolation. Revelation 11 verses 1 and 2. And that's when he commits the abomination of desolation here. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verses 3 and 4, and this is the action, the abomination of desolation, which he will commit at that place. This is the action that will signal the people to flee the land, the Jews to flee the land, and to go hide in Basra, and so on. Verses 45c, "Yet he will come to his end." So basically, it's a verse that talks about the death of the Antichrist. Sometimes in the course of this war against the 10 king, he will be killed at the midpoint of the Great Tribulation, and no human agency will help him here. John, the apostle, gives us further revelation on it in Revelation 13, verses 3, 12, and 14. He points out, like Daniel, that the midpoint of the Great Tribulation, the Antichrist will be killed. But John also tells us that he will be resurrected back to life by Satan, very logical, counterfeit trinity, which will cause the other 7 kings to submit to his authority. No wonder. The 7 kings will submit to his authority when he will be dying in the conflict against all of them, killing 3. He will be killed. But Satan will revive him by the power of the occult. No wonder that the 7 other kings will bow the knee and follow him. With this, we have come to an end concerning point number 5, the Antichrist. Next week, we will do Michael and Israel. You don't want to miss that. The resurrection, the timing of the resurrection and all these things, and then we will be able to finish in a few sessions. I would say 3 more weeks to cover all the details of it all. Please, beloved, take time to watch it, make the notes accordingly, and embrace these studies. They are there for you, they are there for me, we learn from them, and we grow together. I will see you on March the 6th, but I think before March the 6th, we have one more session to do. I bid you shalom, and do not forget to support the Sword Ministries if you have been blessed by the teaching, and if you have been prospered spiritually. We bid you shalom. Thank you.